Hello, friends. It is week 4, lecture 2, which means, holy smokes, we are almost halfway through this entire program. We got one more lecture after today, and then we will be done. And you guys are either moving on to P&A or something else, but it'll be awesome. Just as a reminder, a couple things. We've got discussion questions that are due by 11:59 p.m. Sunday, March 5th. As always, you have 3 core assignments: Axios Pokemon API, routing practice, and Faker API. I think tomorrow for office hour, I'm actually just going to do Faker API with you guys. We're just going to build it out and have some fun with it. So that's that for core assignments. Make sure those are due by Sunday as well. Mid-stack survey, that is going to go out tonight. I'll be sending you an email after class. It is just a survey that helps me. Transparently, it is part of my job, and it is part of like how I get graded as an instructor. But that doesn't mean if there's some things I can do to improve, then please let me know that. But it is something that is part of my KPIs and sort of how I am doing as a job. So it's really important. If you can, I'd really appreciate that you fill it out and let me know if there's things I can do to be better or things that I'm doing well, because that helps everybody and helps me. That way I can do that. Yesterday's YouTube video, I opened YouTube this morning and I saw that there was 2 errors, that they had some uploading issues. So I'm really sorry if you tried looking yesterday or this morning and it wasn't, it was before I noticed that. So really sorry. They should be good now. But yeah, again, really sorry. I'm not sure why YouTube had an error. It worked when I put it everywhere else, but I guess it was still uploading. I don't know if I shut my computer or something. I'm not sure. But they should be good to go. So again, really, really sorry about that. I want to do a recap of yesterday's class real quick. Not in a super in-depth, we're not going to really talk about much of this, but yesterday we talked about routing. And we talked about anatomy of a URL. We talked about how that works. We talked about a base URL. We talked about using navigate, using parameters, using React Router. We really talked about all of this information of how do we actually handle some routing? How do we start manipulating a single page application? And how do we handle those different routes? And somebody asked a really great question yesterday that, transparently, I had a little bit of a brain fart and was like, oh, I have no idea. And then immediately, this is how it always goes. Right after, I was like, oh, duh, that's how we do it. But somebody asked, how do we change the base route? And for what we were doing yesterday, it didn't necessarily make sense, but just wanted to kind of come back to this, is we will do something called modularizing our code, which means that we're actually going to separate and break out, similar to how we break stuff out in components. We're going to break out the format of our code, really our Express code, and our server code. That's what we're going to get to in these next couple of weeks. And so when we do that, we're going to have a routes document. And that routes document, let's say I'm doing, movies, or, I had multiple different types. If I have this bigger website or Facebook, right? They have marketplace, they have friends, they have whatever. Through that, we're actually going to have different documents that handle the different types of routes. So you would have your base route of facebook.com. And then if it was facebook.com/marketplace, you would have a route page, part of our, when we're modularizing it, we're going to have basically all the routes associated to marketplace, all the routes associated to friends, all the routes associated to whatever, right? And so that's how we're going to break it out. So I kind of came back and said, oh, I'll look into that. Totally spaced. I was like, duh, that's how we do it. So that's how we're going to do that. So whoever asked that question, I don't exactly remember who asked that question, but just wanted to come back to that. That's how it's going to work. Whenever we get into more of this full stack application, we're actually going to modularize and set that out. I think it might've been Michael. But yeah, just wanted to touch back because I said I would. So any questions on any of this before we jump into the material we have today? We've got a fun one. We're going to talk about Express, which is our backend framework. And then we're going to talk about Postman, which is a tool that, in my opinion, is something really, really, really important for you in your job. I use it all the time. And then I've used it all the time in different companies. When I worked at Twilio, we used it all the time. It's a really big and popular tool for understanding API requests and different requests and what's happening. So any questions before we jump in and get started? Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about what is Express. Now, we're now leaving the React section of the platform and we're going into Express. And it's kind of funny because it says, what is an API? This thing is called Express, but it's really the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth thing down here. But Express is a framework for JavaScript to handle our backend. And so it's a framework that goes on top of Node that does a lot of sort of the heavy lifting for us. If you've used other languages like Python, you can think of Flask, or if you're, OG and you use Django, it's these frameworks that sit on top of this that have some built-in functionality. So that way we don't have to do everything by hand. You can sort of think about it as how React handles a lot of the front end stuff. Remember how it has Babel and it converts all of our components and stuff into HTML. Now we could use vanilla JavaScript and do that. We could write everything from scratch. That's a huge lift, right? That's a huge, huge thing for us to do. And that's where these libraries / frameworks come in and really help us. Now, one thing I do want to point out is JavaScript or React is a library compared to Express is what we call a framework. We talked about this at the very beginning of class, but really the big difference is a library is a set of tools that we can use to help us. A framework is similar, but it also lays out a framework, makes sense with the name, of how our code is supposed to operate. So that's the little bit of a difference is we're not confined by a framework per se, but it does lay out a specific way that you are supposed to operate within your code. So that is what Express is. It's our framework that's going to sit on top of Node, and it's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting. And we're going to see that here pretty soon. It's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. So that way we don't have to build everything from scratch. And we have a lot of really easy sort of things and connections too. One thing that's good with Express is it is really powerful when it comes to middleware. Now, it itself is not a middleware per se, but it does allow for middleware to happen. All middleware really is going to be is just how do we handle connections between our front end and our back end. And so we'll see whenever we're wanting to make a post request today, when we're using, wanting to handle that data that we're bringing in, that's all that's happening is we're using this thing called middleware to kind of walk it from one side of the park to the other. So Express is our framework that we are going to put on top of Node.js. So you can sort of think about Express and Node.js synonymously. Now, obviously, Node.js is the language itself, and Express is just the framework or how it looks. But it is, Express is going to be our backend. So the way that works is I want to draw real fast for all of my visual learners is we are going to have our front end that is going to be our React. And we're also going to call this React/client. We're going to call this our client side. And you're going to see whenever we're actually setting up our folders, we're going to actually now refer to React as client. So this is going to be our client server. I'm going to say client a lot. What client really means is just what does our user see, right? What does our client see? What do they use? And again, React is our front end. Again, client, you can think about that as front end basically. And so that is our React. And then now we are introducing, we're not even touching React today. I'm going to show you one thing, not in React, but that has to do with React. But now we're talking about our backend, right? And this backend is going to be called Express. And you can think about this as our server. You can also think about this Express is basically our API, similar to how we've been messing with APIs. Express is our server. It also is Node, right? And so on the underpinnings, this is all Node.js. But this is now our back-end stuff. We're now handling the back-end functionality. Now we will be bringing in, whenever, starting next week, we're going to bring in our database, or not next week, actually tomorrow, because we're just going to send it and do it. MongoDB. And that's going to be our database, right? And we will eventually start having these two communicate. I'm not going to do this yet. And then we're going to have these two communicate and maybe send some stuff from our client to our server or Express. It's going to send that same request to our DB. Our DB is going to send some information back and then our client will receive it. So now we're really starting to get into the full stack. We're getting through, there's three pieces of full stack: our client side, our server side, and our database side, our MongoDB. We're now doing, you're going to know 2 out of 3. We're going to have our client and our server side, and then eventually we're going to get to MongoDB. Somebody asked if I'll be going over Faker. We're actually going to do the Faker assignment tomorrow. Faker is just a tool that you can bring up to get some information, but it's not anything we're going to be building in to our code normally. So great question though. Tomorrow we'll talk about that. Okay, perfect. Any questions on really what is Express and how we kind of what we can do with that? Maybe put a 1 in the chat if this makes sense. Cool. Now, let me clear this. I did find this. If you guys have a Mac and you aren't using Stage Manager, it is actually changing my life today. I stumbled upon it and it is God tier. Okay. So what I want to do is I sort of want to show you, or I do want to show you how we're going to start setting things up moving forward. So right now, all we have is this lecture 2 in class. That's where we're at. And I want to add in our React and our server side. So there's 2 things I'm going to do. First off, in here, I'm going to say npx create React app. We're not going to do anything in React right now, but I just want to show you this is how moving forward, we're going to start doing stuff. And we're going to call this client. Every time, just for right now, we're going to call this client. And so it's going to create a React app called client, which I could have done, I see now ahead of time, and we wouldn't have to waste this time right now. But we're just going to call this client. I know that right now, or usually we've been calling it like an assignment name. We're going to want to do client just for our understanding of front end and back end. And you'll see why here in a second. So now we have our client. Awesome. Oh, wow. This is still taking forever. Cool. Now we have our client. If I say ls, we've got this class overview and client. So remember, clients are front end. You can think about that as React. We're also going to have another one. It's going to be called server. So we're going to say mkdir server. Perfect. So if I say ls, I have server. I'm going to cd into server. And then there's nothing in there right now. And so what we're doing is I'm going to create a server.js file. So I'm going to say touch server.js. Perfect. And so I should have a client server. This is how it's going to be set up moving forward. Where your client has all this good stuff. And where we're going to handle React. And then our server is going to have just this for right now. We're going to build into this for sure. Kind of what I was talking about earlier in class, where we modularize this out, really build it out. But for right now, just to understand, we are just going to say something like this. Now, when we're dealing with our server, all right now this is a Node.js file, or just a JavaScript file, right? What I want to do is actually want to install Express. Now, this is a little bit confusing, so I want to make sure that you guys know. Here where it says using Express and it just says npm install, this is only a case if you've downloaded this boilerplate, because this boilerplate code has a package.json that says that you need to run or that you need Express to run. So as always, if you are dealing with npm install and there is a package.json, then what that's going to do is install everything that JSON says, right? All the dependencies, and it'll do that. So for our case right now, we don't have that. So we need to do something like this. I'm here. Actually, I'll just do it in this. I'm going to come to my server. I'm going to get my terminal and say a new terminal. There's a few things we're going to do. So I'm going to cd into server. Now, this is important that we want to make sure we are in our server folder when we're doing this. And then I'm going to say npm install Express. npm install Express. And then this happens. Now, I ran into this issue. You might not. And I did a little bit of digging to try to figure out what's going on. Other people who run this, I don't know if it's a Mac. I haven't figured out why exactly this is happening. But if I run this, I should get a package JSON file in here. I should. But you notice I did not. Now, for some reason, this still works. I've checked with other instructors and we have no idea why this still works. But I should have a package JSON file within my server folder. Because I don't, I'm actually going to run something else. I'm going to make sure that I am in my server and I'm going to run this init-y. I'm going to say npm init, so initialize -y. And what this is going to do is actually create a package JSON file for this folder. So I run this. You see that it has this guy right here. This is great. I can go in and say my author. I can run a bunch of stuff, but more so, it gives me my package JSON file. Cool. Now that I have that, and this is a good thing to have sort of in place. Now that I have that, if I say npm install express, and it gives me this package lock, and we can now see that dependencies it installs express. Again, I'm not exactly sure why that is. Somebody asked what that it is npm init-y. So it's right here. I'm not exactly sure why it's not auto doing it. So like instructor Caden and I were meeting today and I was like, I'm not understanding why this is working and not showing up. If he does it, it automatically shows up. So maybe it's a Windows thing, maybe it's a Mac thing. I'm not sure. It's not a node thing. So I'm still looking for why that is, but it is really a good sort of habit to run, to have this package JSON and use npm init-y to make sure that if somebody wants to use your project, they have the dependencies that you need to have. Now, one thing to note is because of these node modules, remember these pesky node modules, we don't want to have them when we update or put to our GitHub, right? So what else do I need to add into my server file? Anybody remember? If I don't want these to go to GitHub or I don't want to put them to Git. Yeah, exactly. Good job, guys. So what I'm going to do, if you have to run npm init-y, or if you don't, just make sure you have this. I'm actually going to create a file called .gitignore. And what I'm going to do in that is I'm just going to say /node modules. Modules. Duh. Perfect. Nope. Perfect. Not, I know, I can't spell. Modules, right? And if you ever want to check, is this correct? You can say, you can go into this guy, say node modules. I might just do this. You can have one gitignore that you put within your projects. If you wanted to have a gitignore, oops. You wanted to have a gitignore like down here. Now, one thing to note though, is these node modules are not in this /node modules. It'd be client /node modules. These ones are in server /node modules. So if you just put node modules, it's not going to look at those inner ones. So you'd have to do both. So it's kind of up to you. But I'm just going to put it in here for right now where I ignore it. So when I do push it to GitHub, it is ignored and I don't have to deal with that. Okay. So now we have our server. I'm going to get rid of client right here. We have our server. We got some node modules. We know that Express is in here. Perfect. We're all set up for right now. Somebody asked, but the client gitignore should automatically have the node modules, right? Yep. So client will automatically have that. I was just saying if you only wanted to have one gitignore file, then you would have to identify, okay, I want my client, and you'd have to have another one for server, because if you just put /node modules, remember, it's just like a, where is this located? So / means that it's in the same location. If I needed to go into server and then node modules, it would say something like server node modules. I have to go into server and then say that file. So just wanted to point that out. You can have one. Having two is also fine. It doesn't matter. It literally doesn't change anything because it's getting ignored either way. Okay, cool. So now that we have this, somebody asked, so if you deleted your node modules after you completed a project to save space, would you just run npm install? Yep. If you would probably have to cd into your client and say npm install because they're different, because it's really looking at this package JSON. And since these are two different packages, right? You would cd into client npm install. Then once that's done, you'd cd into server npm install, and it's going to look at both. Yeah, so you would just have to do it twice, unfortunately. Now you could, yeah, if you wanted to, you could have a package JSON out here where you combine it all, but that's not necessary for right now. Okay. Somebody asked, are both the client server folder stored into one folder? Yep. So for right now, this is just in my lecture. And this is how it's going to be moving forward. If you have a full stack application, you're going to have one folder, and then it's going to have your client and your server. So this is how we're going to do moving forward. Okay. Let's see. Perfect. So now in order for us, we're going to do this in a second, but what I also want to point out, actually, yeah, we'll just do that real fast. So let's go ahead and set up our Express server or our Express framework in here. So we have this server.js. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to copy and paste this. Now let's talk about what's happening here. This const express equals require express is basically us saying import express from express. Now, the issue with saying import express from express is there's something weird with Node, that this is the antiquated sort of legacy way. And if you want to do it the other way, you have to do some very unique things where you have to say like it's an experimental mode. So instead of just saying import, just do const express equals require express, and that works just fine. So this is us importing express because we have it. We have to obviously have to have it installed in order for us to import it and require it. Then we're just saying const app, and we are running this express function. And so if I hover over it, it says this creates an express application, which is top level function exported by the express module. What that means is we are now applying this express framework to our node.js, to our server.js file, right? So now we're using this application and we can have access to the different things of Express. And then the last thing is we are just saying const port 8000. This is not super necessary. You can do it. I think it's nice because anywhere you put port instead of, if you change the port ever, then instead of having to change it in a bunch of different places, you just have to change it in one variable. But this is just saying this is where our server is going to run. So moving forward, what we'll do when we get into full stack is, if you remember, React is on 3000. Our backend is going to run on 8000. So we're actually going to have two servers running simultaneously because it's our front end and our back end. So that's what we're saying is we're saying, okay, great. We are creating this port, and this is what we're wanting to run on. You can run on other ports, just not 3000 because that's what React is going to do. So cool. So we have set up our Express file. Now, the last thing we want to do is we want to make sure, in order for this to really work, is we got to add in this piece of code. You want to put this on the bottom where it says app.listen. Again, this app is referring to this variable. So if you were to call it anything else, you want to make sure that these match. Listening on port, right? So we're giving it the port that we want it to listen to, where you want the server to run. It's a callback function, and all this is going to do is console log whatever port that we're at. So it's going to say listening on port 8000. Cool. Now, in order for me to run this, I don't think anything's going to happen right now, but I'm going to download this tool called NodeMon. Now, I can just say node server.js, and that will work just fine. But there is this tool called NodeMon that if I run just node server.js, then every time I change something, I have to rerun my server and update it every single time. That's where NodeMon comes in, is it will automatically, anytime I save something, it'll refresh my server for me. It'll save you a ton of time. And so we can actually install it globally by just saying npm install -g. This -g is saying globally, and then NodeMon. So if we run this, This will globally install. So it doesn't necessarily matter if we're in our server, if we're in whatever folder we're in, because this is installing globally. It allows me to now use NodeMon. So when I come here, I can say node, NodeMon server, which is .js, which is my file name. And now you can see that it says starting node server.js, listening on port 8000. So this means that my backend server is officially running. We are now up and running. We are in business. Now you can see that I just saved it and it reran it, restarting due to changes. That's where NodeMon really comes in handy. Again, I could just say node server.js, but every time I make a change, I'd have to rerun that. That's where NodeMon, if I were to tell you anything, make sure you do NodeMon. Okay. Any questions about our setup? Katie, is that you insinuating that you got some questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'd forgotten.
No, you're totally fine. I'm just messing. Any questions on this? Fairly straightforward. Let me look in the chat. So somebody said, since we're working with more than React now, should we run git init on the project repository and then React will recognize that as a parent repository already as a git folder? Ooh, so if you are, this is a great question. If you are not doing everything in one folder like I am, right? So like I've got the parent folder of Feb 23 MERN. Whenever you run React, right? If you say npx create React app, it automatically will create a git repository. And so if then you try to create a git repository on the parent, like if I were to try to just do this as a separate git repository, then it'll be nested and there'll be an issue there. So you want to make sure that if you're going to do a separate one, then what I would actually do is I would create my project folder first, run git init, run, kind of get that set up, then go in and say npx create React app, because then it will recognize that the parent has a git file, that it already has a repository associated. If you do it the other way, where you say npx create React app and then you try to initialize your parent, then it will run into an issue because git will have already been created because it didn't exist when you ran npx create React app. Does that make sense, Jonathan? Perfect. Cool. Okay. So let's look at what we can do with this server, right? So what's really great is, again, Express handles a lot of stuff for us. Express handles a ton of stuff for us. So in this case, we can just say app.get, and that will be our request to some sort of route, right? And in this case, we don't have anything. We haven't connected the two together, so we're not there yet. But let's say we wanted to have some sort of route. In this case, we're going to call it /API, or we're going to call it something different. But for the first time, we can call it /API. And then let's break down exactly what's going on. So here, I have this app.get. Again, app comes from this. This is my Express application. So these have to be the same. If you call this unicorn, this has to be unicorn.get. We are saying a get request. Now, remember, we've talked about HTTP verbs quite a bit. This will be the third time. Here they are, so I'm not going to go over them. But get is used for getting insensitive. This is called insensitive information. But this is basically just getting information. Posting is we're posting sensitive. We're giving information from a form. Put is when we want to update the entire piece of information. Patch is when we just want to update one piece of information, and delete is obviously when we want to delete some information. That's what these methods are. So we're actually just going to use get for right now. And we are saying app.get, we're saying /API. Now, built in, because we already have this 8000, it's like it's saying localhost 8000 /API. This is inferred because that's what my server port is. So when it just says /API, this localhost 8000 is inferred. If you were to change this to 5001, it would say localhost 5001 /API. That's what we go to. So there's a couple things that happen with this is whenever we are using a HTTP method, or we're making some sort of request on our Express application, we have two things we have to pass in. It is our request. You can call it rec or you can call it res. This could be called unicorn and cupcakes, right? These aren't hard coded words. I would say you're usually going to find rec and res. This is what you will find most of the time. Sometimes people write out request and response, but that's what this stands for is request. We are making some sort of request, and then we are getting or giving some sort of response. Now, one thing to note is that with Express, we always have to have some sort of response. We always have to give a response back, or not necessarily for Express, but when we're dealing with Postman, it's always going to expect us to have a response, which leads me into my next piece. We're going to use a tool called Postman. Now, I put this in Discord. So if you haven't done this, then if you haven't downloaded it, then you're going to need to download it. But here is a tool that we're going to use, and it's going to be called Postman. Now, Postman is really, really, really popular because it allows us to make requests to certain things, to APIs, and see how or sort of what response we can get, what this API is going to give us, and allows us to work with APIs before we get and kind of code it out. We want to be able to mess and interpret and use an API to our advantage. So in this case, let's just go ahead. I was testing it out. What you're going to do is when you download Postman, it's going to give you something like this. Now you can, if this doesn't automatically show up, you might just have to press new. When you press new, you're just going to say create a basic request. And so then it's going to bring you here. Now the Postman does a lot of things for us that we don't need to do for right now. But you can set up environments, you can do a bunch of stuff, and you just need the free version. You don't need anything more than the free version for what we're doing. Now, what this allows us to do is make a request and get some information back. So here, my server is up and running, and it's listening on port 8000. Awesome. We're good to go. So what I come here is I first choose what type of request do I want to make. Now you see that there's a little bit more than what we've talked about, but really here are our 5, right? Our get, post, put, patch, and delete. We want to make a get request, right? Because you identify what type of request. And we are going to make it to localhost 8000 / we called it API. Localhost 8000 / API. And when I says send, we see that I get this message, hello world. I am pinging this Express application, my API. It is coming here. I'm making a request. I'm not doing anything with the request, but I'm giving it a response. I say that my response is in JSON. I give a message and hello world. Let's go ahead and console.log. Not hello world. I want to console.log my request, and let's see what we're getting here. Perfect. So let's come back here to Postman. I can also, no, I'm going to say that. I'm just going to press it again. Perfect. It sent my request. I got something back. That's good to go. And now you can see this is the request that is being made from from Postman all the way to our API. Now you can see it's a ton of stuff. We didn't have to do this. We didn't have to build any of this stuff out. All we had to do was use Express, and this handles our request for us, right? And this is, again, sort of the power of frameworks. I didn't have to build any of this junk out. It just was built for me. And this is still, I'm still in my request object. It's huge, right? And there's a couple things in here that I want to show you. There's 2 things that we're going to look at. We're going to look at params. So if I were to pass in a parameter, which we're going to see here in a bit, we're going to kind of do that at the end. I can pass in a parameter that is my rec.params. Perfect. We know that. And then the second thing that this has access to is not, I passed it, is going to be our body. It's going to be a rec.body. But let me find, it's somewhere in here. There's going to be a key of body. Headers, parser. Sorry, this thing is huge. Right now it'll be empty because we're not doing anything. But somewhere in there, I guess you can just trust me here. Somewhere in here, we're going to have a body that we are passing through and giving some sort of information for. Yeah. Okay, I'm not going to waste our time. There is a body here. So you can look and you can find where the body is at. But this is making this request, right? This is the entire request that we're receiving at this API. And then all we're saying is right now, we just want to give back this response. In this case, it says, hello world. Hello world. Any questions on what we're doing here? Any questions on any of this? You guys put a 1 in the chat if this is making sense. You guys put a 0 if it's not. Now, one thing I want to show you if you're dealing with APIs in Postman is you can do a few things. If you guys have messed with any APIs that have authorization, you can add in authorization here. So you could say maybe like API key, and then you pass in an API key. This was an API test key, sandbox key that I had in. If you have headers that you need to pass in, then you can pass in headers. So the API itself will show you like, oh, you need this header of content type. Content type. And then usually it's like application JSON, right? And so if you have certain things you have to pass in for your API to work, then you can put your headers here. And then in the second, we're going to look at how do we pass in some actual information and fake, like we're going to do a post. So there's a lot of stuff you can do if you need to add parameters. It's just basically what is your API asking for, and this guy will have it for you. ChatGPT just released a new API. Yeah, I'm ChatGPT's god tier. I love ChatGPT. I use it literally every day, multiple times a day. So I believe in everything ChatGPT. Unfortunately, they're Microsoft, but alas, that's okay. Okay. So now that we've done that and we are able to do our get, we're able to get some sort of value. Let's actually go in and deal with my routing. Let's deal with my routing. And what we're going to do is we've been using movies this entire time. So I'm going to stick with that and say, I'm just going to pull this in from over here. Is I've got a list or an array of movie objects that are going to have an ID, that have a title and a year. So let's change how we're going to do this. Instead of doing API, I'm going to say movie / all movies. Now, part of RESTful APIs is, again, that we're going to have something that associates all of them together. So if I want one movie, all movies, edit movie, new movie, I'm going to put movie / and then what do I want to do with that? So in this case, movie, I'm dealing with my movies. I just want to get all my movies, right? So this is going to be a get request to get me all of them. Well, all I have to do in that case is I'm going to not do this anymore. Is I'm just going to say movies. Perfect. So I'm making a request to /movie / all movies. And just know that you do need to have this / here. So I'm making a request to that. And then I should give a response of all of my movies. So, oops, we come here. It is movie / all movies. If I make this request, I have an issue. Oops, because I changed this. Let's get rid of that. Nope, don't want that. Okay. Now, oh, also don't want this either. Tough, no off. Cool. Sorry, what was happening is because I clicked authorization, it was thinking that I had to pass some authorization, and that was an issue. Okay, so, but now you can see that I ask for all of my movies. I'm doing a get request of movie, which for me, it's part of RESTful routing, is it associates all of my routes to something. Again, whenever we get and modularize this and break it down, let's say we were going to do movies, we would have a movie portion. And then what do I want to do? I want to get all movies. Perfect. And then all I'm returning is all of my movies. All of my movies. Cool. Any questions so far about what we're doing? One, perfect. Okay. So that is for GET. That's for a GET request. And if you look at the HTTP verbs, it's saying a GET request is for insensitive information, meaning that it's pretty simple. We just make a request and then we just get some sort of response, right? We hit this API and it gives us something. Now, let's say I wanted to actually add in some data. I want to, the way that you can think of a post is usually a form, right? Any sort of form is going to be a post request. Well, in order for me to do that, that's where some middleware comes in. Remember, we talked about that middleware is basically this piece that is going to handhold some information from one end to the other and go and get something back, right? And so in order for me to do a post request, I have to add in these pieces of middleware. So let's go ahead and let's add these in. We'll talk and walk through exactly what that looks like. We want to make sure that we add them under our actual app creation. So it has to be under this guy. I don't know why there's a space there, but we want to put this ahead of everything. That way I have the ability to make a post request. Whoops. So here I'm just saying app.use. And again, app is express. So this is basically saying like express use, express JSON. So being able to take in some JSON. And then express URL encoded. These are my middleware pieces that are allowing for my my property to receive and return some information. So you can see that this URL encoded is a built-in function that returns middleware that only parses URL encoded bodies and only looks at request where the content type header matches the type option. Now, we're not dealing with a content type here, but this is a crucial piece of information where we're dealing with our JSON. We are passing in some JSON and getting some JSON back. So this middleware allows me to pass information, i.e. make a post request, and then we can either update this or we can do something fun that way. So somebody asked, when we start using databases, instead of hard coding movies, would we just include the database so that it can pull all the information? That's exactly what we're going to do. When we deal with MongoDB, if I were to do get all movies here, right? Instead of just returning movies, I would then make a request to get all movies from MongoDB. And then I would return, or I'd give a response to send all the movies to my client. So that's exactly what we would do. We would get this, we would go then hit our database, grab all the information and give it back to our client. We're not there yet. That's the full stack piece. We're on 2 out of the 3, but that's exactly what we're going to do. Instead of having a hard code, this will just be in a database somewhere for sure. Okay. So now let's say we want to add in a movie. We want to create a new movie. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say app.post. Again, if I'm doing any sort of form, I'm doing post. Here, I'm going to say movie, new movie. And then what I'm going to do is, let me just close this out real fast. Oops, by the way. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is, in this case, I just want to console.log. Oops, console.log request.body. So I want to show what that looks like and how that's going to operate. So here, I want to, and then again, I have to give a response because that is what that JSON, because in order for this to work, in order for Postman to work, remember, you have to have this response. So let's go into this. If I want to make a post request here, I can just add in another one so you can keep that we don't have to keep rewriting the same thing or overwrite. And come here, you make a post. I'm going to say local post 8000 /movie/ New movie. I think that's what I called it. New movie, right? Nope, sorry, wrong thing. Yeah, slash new movie. Cool. Oops. Perfect. Now, if I want to add in some information, there's a few things that I need to know, and this is based off of because we're just hard coding this, but just like Louis said, we would have this from a database and we would see what exact information I need to pass in. But I see that I need to pass in an ID, a title, and a year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here in Postman. I'm going to go to this body portion right here. This is my body of my request, right? I'm making some sort of request. I want to give some information. And I need to, what information do I want to give it? So I'm going to go to body and I'm going to come and see this. And then I'm going to click this raw right here. And then we are dealing with JSON. So I'm going to go and I'm going to change it to JSON. So I go to body, raw, JSON, and now I make my JSON request. So I'm going to say ID is equal to 5. I don't think I have a 5. Nope. Perfect. ID is equal to 5. I am going to say title is equal to Shrek. And then I'm going to say year is equal to, I don't know, 2001. Now, right now, this isn't doing much, right? Because I'm not dealing with anything. I'm just going to see my request being made. So when I make this, let's say send, I get back message okay. That was my response. So that tells me, okay, cool, everything worked. Let's open this up. Come back here. And you can see because I just did rec.body, instead of getting all of that code, I just got body and we can see this did work. I passed this through. I was able to say ID, title, and year. So now if I wanted to do that, instead of just console logging, I could just say something like movies dot push, and then I could say rec.body. So then if I come here and I send again, I get a message okay. And if I come here and I say all movies, let's see if it's persistent. Now I have this new value of Shrek. So now I've created, part of my CRUD is I've created a new value, a new movie in this case. And the R for CRUD is reading. I am reading these values. So again, what we did here is we sent a post request. We had a request and the dot body was the actual information we added in this body portion. We said raw, we did type, raw type JSON. We passed in our information, it matched, right? And then what we did is we just went ahead and added that value to this list already, or this array already, gave this response here, and then I reran this guy, and now it was updated with my new movie, i.e. it now has Shrek. Okay. Any questions for what we've done so far? This making sense? Did I lose you guys? I see people are leaving. Okay, perfect. Last thing we can do is get some data from a URL. So if I have this get request and I pass in some information, I can actually get that value similar to how we talked about dynamic routing yesterday. I can get that information and I can target that piece of information that I pass in. So let's say that I wanted to say app.get. I just want to get one specific movie, right? And I'm going to say movie / ID. That is going to do a few things. I'm just right now going to, let's do this. I don't want it to give away my answer. Now we know that I've got a request and response. And we know that my request had, no, son of a gun, I already gave the answer away. we know that my request had a few things, including a dot body, and we talked about a dot params, right? We talked about a dot params. Now, what this dot params allows me to do is grab the parameters in my request that are being passed through. Now, one thing to note, and I saw this in Discord, so it's a great sort of note. This must match this. I think in Discord, somebody had it as like this. And so then they were seeing, okay, why is this not pulling this? If you're going to have an underscore there, this has to have an underscore. These have to be the same. So it's really important. If we're dealing with parameters here, they have got to be the exact same thing. This must match this dot, whatever. So in this case, before we even get to that, if I want to console.log rec.params.id, cool. So now I got a movie ID. So I can come here and do another one. So I could say localhost 8,000 /movie/2. Now, if I run this, I get a response of an issue. Localhost movie/2. Movie is not defined. What do we call this? 8,000. 8,000 movie 2.
Is it because your response is still movie?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I thought it was going to say this. That's what you get for letting GitHub Copilot do it for you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Michael. I didn't even pay attention. I assumed that it said okay. Okay. So the issue was that I was giving back movie, but we didn't know what movie was because I had just I had console log that out. So we we're trying to return this guy, but that wasn't anything. Okay. So all it did was we have this okay. So let's go check my console and we see that I get 2. If I were to pass in 5, right, it doesn't matter. Cool, passes in 5. Now, one thing I really want to note is, so there's 2 things, right? So now we're able to grab that ID and you can see sort of where we're going with this. If I just wanted to get one specific movie, I can use something like, we can do movies.find or we could do filter, right? Filter would be the same sort of thing where we could get a movie or a value and kind of get that back. .find will sort of do the same thing. It'll just find this value in this guy. No, it won't. Oh yeah, movies.find. Okay. So what this is doing is this is creating a new variable called movie, going into my movies array .find, again, a built-in function. Movie, it's a callback function where we're saying movie.id equals. Now, this is really important. When this is being passed through, no matter what it is, or no matter what we name this always comes back as a string. Always comes back as a string. So if I have this triple equals, if I'm comparing a number to a string, triple equals is never going to work because remember, if I have a double equals, it just compares the 2. And even if they're not the same data type, it still will work. But this is a strict comparison. So it's going to also check the data type. It's a great thing to note. So if I'm going to do that, then I can either, I can just typecast it. And what this is going to do is this is going to make this an integer. And so now I'm comparing the 2 correctly, right? I am comparing this ID, which is the ID here, with my actual numerical value that I'm passing through. And so then it should work just okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say movie. And let's go ahead and get a movie. So again, it does have to have a, we have 5 of them because remember Shrek's there too. So if I run this, I should get Shrek back. Ooh, I get nothing back. Let's say 4. Okay. Oh, I think it's because my server died, and so it lost out. Let's see. Yeah, so it looks like it lost out on Shrek because when I messed up, so it got rid of the original value. So because of that, and because I refreshed this, I think this got resaved, and so it resaved my variable of movies to only this and forgot about Shrek. Perfect. But we can see that I ask for one specific movie and it goes and gets me that movie. And goes and gets me that movie. And this is what's going to be really important when we're dealing with, like a user's dashboard. If I want a specific user, I just click them and then it takes me to their dashboard or their profile, something like that. So now we're able to take in a value from here and get only specific movies whose ID matches whatever's being passed through. And this is really what we're going to do when we start doing full stack stuff. We're going to use our unique identifiers and make sure that we're getting only the specific values each time. So just as a recap, we've talked about Express. We brought that in as our framework. We created it on port 8000. We installed some middleware so that way we could handle our post requests. We're able to use the HTTP verbs of .get and .post to add new information to just this movies array. Again, we're just using this because we don't have a database yet. We're able to get a specific movie by using this rec.params.id. Again, this .id must match whatever we pass or whatever we call it here. Because if I were to look at the actual request params, let's actually just do that. Well, we saw that it was 2, or we saw that it was this value, but it's going to look for whatever this is. Like if I have multiple, right, I could have another / year, right? If I have multiple, then this .id allows me to identify, no, this is the one I'm talking about, not this one. So you can have obviously multiple dynamic parameters in there. That means you can put in anything, but it will only refer to this. Okay. Let's see if that's everything I wanted to cover today. Yep, that is everything I wanted to cover. So it's 6 o'clock now on the dot, 6:01. Any questions on what we've talked about today? Anything that is needed or confusing that I can walk through? That's all I have. I'm glad it was helpful, Jonathan. Again, tomorrow, I'm going to introduce MongoDB, and then we're going to start now, because I think it's a little bit confusing, because just like, a couple of you guys pointed out, like, wait, it's not saving anything. Oh, we're just updating this. Before we jump into actual CRUD, we already are sort of doing CRUD in a way. We're creating, by using this post, we're able to create, and by using this get, we're able to read. But we will eventually get to a point where after our database, I think we're going to maybe do 2 days of Mongo. We'll see how tomorrow goes. And if we can cover everything. So we might do Mongo tomorrow and then Tuesday of next week. And then we're going to start doing CRUD and putting everything together. So then the next 5 lectures, we're just going to be building. We'll talk about CRUD and then we're going to build out an actual full stack application. So that way up to your exam, you should have a full stack application that is working, that is got some features. And if we can, I'll kind of give you some tips and tricks of like, hey, maybe you might want to look into how you would do blank for a black belt. And then we'll deploy it. And so that way you guys should be fully set up and ready for the actual exam itself. And I'll pseudocode when I'm doing that and as I'm building that. So that way you guys can see how I would approach building an actual application from front to back. So somebody asked, am I sending out the survey via email? I will. I can, yes. I can give, yeah, I'll send it out via email. Michael, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, for tomorrow, would the reading just be like next Tuesday and Wednesday's reading, or how much of it are you going to cover?
Yeah, so I will say, let's see. Yeah, so I would say we're gonna deal with sort of the beginning. We're not gonna deal with like like the nice thing is if you can download it, like that's kind of all the readings up to that. There's the basics section, but other than that, it's just kind of downloading. That's all the readings are. So I would try downloading it tonight. So we'll talk about downloading, and then I'm hoping to get through basically this tomorrow, because this should just be a basic this is a modularized CRUD app, but basically I want to introduce MongoDB and Mongoose, and then how they all connect. So I'm thinking it might be 2 lectures, depends on if people are having installation issues. We're going to talk about sort of not the theory, but why we're using MongoDB NoSQL versus SQL, and not only SQL versus SQL, and how we're going to integrate and use CRUD. And then hopefully we can start at least creating reading tomorrow, or at least connecting everything Express plus Mongoose. That's my goal. What is Mongoose? What is Mongo? And how do we connect them all? We can start on CRUD next week. So we'll start CRUD here and then CRUD again if we need, so if a third one. I don't think we will though. And then we can get started with some full stack. I'm hoping that we actually just move this to here. Yeah. So I would say if you just worry about installing really for tomorrow. And then maybe if you have some time, try reading this Express plus Mongoose.
Cool.
Yeah. I think it'll just be much more helpful if you guys actually are dealing with a database versus not. So cool. Alrighty, friends. Well, that's all I have for tonight. I'll stop the recording.